Welcome to the Troutman Sanders Battery and Storage Podcast. I'm your co-host, Cliff Sikora.
And I'm Bill Durasmo.
In this podcast,
we will interview battery and storage experts, industry thought leaders, Cliff.
We want you to hear the unique perspectives that we hear from industry veterans and how they're deploying this new and very exciting technology into an industry that wasn't particularly exciting for most folks just several years ago.
But you know, the focus of this podcast is going to be on the people, the thought leadership. We're not necessarily going to get into the weeds on technical issues, but we're going to focus on the transformation of the resource fleet and how storage fits within that transformation. We're going to get into some of the cutting-edge regulatory and policy issues. We're going to talk a little bit about how you finance and deploy these assets, how you seek cost recovery. Are you going to look at on-balance sheet or off-balance sheet? We're going to talk about some of the planning issues associated with these devices.
And in addition, there are numerous issues associated with operating storage resources once they are deployed. What sort of products can they provide? How will those products be priced? Will they be priced in front of the meter? Will they be priced in back of the meter? Will the two dovetail with one another? What is the future of solar plus storage, microgrids, and environmental issues? On the surface, one might say that batteries are an environmental benefit, but not necessarily. Accordingly, we look forward to bringing you thought leaders, folks who have been in the industry for many years and are dealing with an assumption change, a major transformational change regarding the physics of the business. Electricity can now be stored.
This is an exciting time. We hope you join us. Hello and welcome to the Troutman Sanders Energy Storage Podcast. This is Bill Durasmo, and today our guest is Mr. John Fernandes, Senior Consultant with Customized Energy Solutions. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Good morning.
Before joining Customized Energy Solutions, John spent 5 years in the development and IPP space working with a variety of generation storage technologies and their deployment. And then before that, John also worked at FERC and was a regulatory manager for an investor-owned utility before his time at FERC. He has a master's in business administration from the University of Delaware, a master's in public health from Johns Hopkins, and is a guest lecturer for the University of Colorado at Denver Global Energy Management Program. So, John, welcome today, and I'm glad you could join us. Tell us a little bit about Customized Energy Solutions in general, and then with regard to you personally, what's keeping you busy these days on behalf of your clients?
Sure, yeah, and good morning, and thanks again for having me. Really looking forward to the conversation here. So Customized Energy Solutions, broadly speaking, industry consulting company. We are very market-centric. When I say market, I mean the organized markets. That's really where the company started. We have ex-ISO staff from across the U.S., and we have a pretty good team of people covering every one of the ISOs, and it's a reporting and a strategy service that this group offers to our clients. Emerging Tech, my team, is part of Future Grid. We are a subset of that. And we do something very similar, very focused on emerging technologies, which, to partly answer your question, Bill, is all energy storage these days. That's really what the industry is after. My team also has an internal modeling platform that we built in-house. And this helps us size, optimize, and come up with a participation strategy for storage plants. So we really help the development community get these projects online. We can help utilities get these resources into their plans, their rate base, whatever it may be. Customize, another big key to the company. We have a wholesale group. It's an asset management group. We have a 24-hour desk in Philadelphia where the home office is. And we operate about 9 gigawatts of energy platforms, including over 200 megawatts of storage in North America. And those guys really inform, especially us on the storage side, when something like 841 comes along and we're now reevaluating how storage is going to earn revenues, participate in markets. We can go to that group and say, guys, on a day-to-day basis, what does this really look like? And that's what's keeping us busy, really. There's global clients now looking to get into the U.S. markets, all U.S. markets, including ERCOT. Not subject to Order 841, but lots of interest in ERCOT. And we are modeling a lot of projects these days, and a lot of advanced projects. There's a lot of hybrid storage, so storage co-located with another resource. Storage acting as infrastructure, so providing transmission or distribution type services. So the modeling itself is getting really complex. And it's great to work with sophisticated clients because they really keep us informed where the industry is going, what kind of projects are folks trying to deploy. So it's a great two-way relationship we have with these guys.
No, that sounds fantastic. And it sounds like you guys are at the bleeding edge, so to speak. And well, this is a podcast focused on storage, obviously, and you just mentioned that it's, in terms of new technologies or emerging technologies, it's all storage all the time. So maybe this is a silly question, but I have to ask, how did you become interested in storage, specifically for yourself?
And really the best answer to that is I actually got lucky. I was very fortunate to have some of the opportunities I did, especially in the commercial sector. So my time at the utility, my time at FERC really set me up on the career path that I'm on, specifically with energy policy, wholesale market policy. I then had the opportunity to join Res Americas, development construction company here in Colorado, where I'm based. And Res was a very early mover in the storage space, way ahead of the curve. That they brought me in to help not just decipher policy, but help set policy and strategy for the company when it comes to energy storage. So it became a crash course in the platform. I was employee number 4 on the team, but the people that were already there had already done a lot of the background work. Really great, just technology knowledge that they had. And then I was able to progress from there. I worked for another development company, again, very well positioned in the storage space. And then the opportunity came along to join Customized. And I had actually been a Customized customer in the past while at Res. So I jumped on the opportunity to join the team. And this is really a global presence that CES has. We have an India office that created the India Energy Storage Alliance. Really great technical expertise here. I'd mentioned the modeling platform. One of my team members, Mike Berlinski, was part of the Beacon Power flywheel that really set a lot of precedent in the industry with Order 755. So in a way, it's just I've been teamed up with really great colleagues. I've been able to learn a lot and just got my hands dirty very early on.
Well, it sounds like timing is everything, right? And you came on the scene at the right time. But you seem very plugged in, obviously, as you mentioned in your intro, regarding regional market developments. And so, obviously, one of the elephants in the room, so to speak, at this time is Order 841 and how that rollout is going. So, I don't know if you just want to speak for a minute about how you think the various regions, and it doesn't have to be all the regions, obviously, but just looking at a few of the regions that you're most familiar with, how do you think they compare in terms of their Order 841 implementation? What do you think some of the big issues going forward might be? That sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a well-timed question, especially considering by now, I think we the industry, we're expecting to have a final order from FERC. And there were some deficiency letters that came out. There were some clarification requests that came out. And now we have the delay from the states looking for an opt-out clause for Order 841. The original plan for this order was that implementation was going to be done by December of this year. We're not expecting that timeline to be met. It could be significantly delayed as FERC works out this big question from the states. And if you don't mind, Bill, real quick, a quick disclaimer, me talking with you guys this morning, I'm going to speak for myself. I'll say we a lot, just referring to what our team here at Customized has kind of come across in terms of our analysis. We are the markets consultant for the National Energy Storage Association. So sometimes I'll say we in terms of the storage industry, but my views this morning are going to be my own.
Oh, absolutely. And that goes for us as well on this end.
Okay, very good. It's making sure to get present company included, keep the lawyers happy, right? So Order 841, it's funny. FERC is not responsible for market design, right? FERC is responsible for just and reasonable and breaking down the barriers. And so when this order first came across, you heard a lot of folks in the industry, a lot of folks in the stakeholder process. It was too vague. They didn't do enough. And it's really not FERC's position to tell the markets how to get from A to B. They just tell them get from A to B, right? So they identified barriers to storage in the markets, and were able to specifically identify those, right? There were technical limitations. The markets didn't respect the unique operating characteristics of storage, and those walls needed to come down. How the markets were going to do that was really up to the markets. And we have seen quite a bit of differences across, let's just say, the 6 jurisdictional ISOs. And I guess just to capture the big ones, and we'll move from west to east, starting with California. I think California was probably there even before 841 came out. There were a couple modifications they needed to make to their participation rules. But as the industry knows, California has been embracing and really pushing storage for quite some time now. So California was in a good spot. We, the industry, actually, and even FERC actually referenced the Cal ISO participation structures for storage as some industry best practices or some benchmarks that could be used by the other ISOs to get to compliance. So California, good shape, complex market, lots of opportunity for storage. The Southwest Power Pool, so when Order 841 first hit, SPP staff was up to their necks in the Mountain West integration that they were actively putting in. Right. And so they did not get an early start on 841 compliance on their initial straw proposal for their participation model. And it was a little bit of a concern for the industry, as more months of stakeholder meetings rolled by and they hadn't put this thing out, we're going, you guys are going to be on a really short timeline here. To staff's credit, they caught up right away. Now, SPP, there's not advanced storage operating in the market. It has certainly not been what you would call a hotbed for storage activity. And so SPP really just went through Order 841 and very systematically incorporated the components that FERC wanted in the participation model. And it made it a fairly straightforward process. The big question that industry had along the way was qualification for resource adequacy. Southwest Power Pool, so Southwest Power Pool does not have a capacity market.
Right.
And so for them, it was, well, we don't have to comply with that piece of it. Southwest Power Pool does have a resource adequacy construct where SPP will approve classes of resources that the load serving entities, they're called LREs in SPP, just because the industry needs as many acronyms as possible.
Right.
So the LREs in SPP, they have this bucket of resources that SPP will approve for them to meet their reliability obligations. And so the one thing that industry wanted was storage to be in that bucket. And we had to have a conversation with staff about that one, just stressing the importance of that. And staff came through. We needed some clarification on the time duration, but it ended up being really great for the industry that the market was willing to work with us.
And when you say staff, just to be clear, you're talking about RTO staff, and in this case, SPP staff.
Correct. Yes. And it's, for the most part, when you look at how market stakeholder processes are structured, there's a markets group, the MWG and SPP, the markets subcommittee and MISO. These are really the staffers that were in charge of the compliance plan for Order 841. So great point. These are the staffers that we're talking about.
At a high level, what you're talking about with SPP is similar to the MISO model, where it's not a capacity market, but just a resource adequacy construct. And then there's various ways that the load-serving entities, or the LREs and SPP, which are the same thing, the way that they would comply with that obligation to have enough capacity, so to speak, on hand to serve their load.
Precisely correct. And MISO has moved along. I mean, they do have a capacity auction now. So there was a bit more clear line of sight to MISO's compliance with that part of the order. But per your point, MISO is very much almost completely a vertically integrated market, right? You have your vertically integrated utilities. They are responsible for managing their resource portfolio, meeting their load obligation to their ratepayers. And that's in a pretty stark contrast to a lot of the markets in the East that are almost wholly deregulated. And so you really have the commercial side of the market bringing these resources in. But yeah, a good segue. So MISO, and MISO has a 4-hour capacity product for resources like storage that cannot provide 24 hours of uninterrupted service. So that was already in place with MISO. They brought it right in. The capacity conversations have been really interesting in the markets when it comes to storage, because it's, and you hear this inside or outside of markets when people start to talk about the peak these days. And historically, capacity, reliability, the peak, it was really in terms of many hours, right? 10 hours, 12 hours. I need around the clock reliability from my resources. And now, especially that resources are becoming, very flexible and very precise, and our forecasting tools have really been able to look at the market intervals much more granular. We're starting to see the peak maybe is only 2 hours. And these 840, yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, well, it's interesting because when you were talking about MISO, and it's the 4-hour peak, right, that they look at.
Right, it's the 4 hours, yep.
Yep. And so, if you have a storage resource and you want to get it qualified for capacity credit, you got to demonstrate that it could deliver for that 4-hour peak. But now you're saying folks are thinking about getting even more granular, if that's the right word, maybe looking at a 2-hour peak.
Exactly. And it actually did come up in the MISO compliance conversations. It came up in the Southwest Power Pool as well. And you actually heard some of the LREs in SPP saying, our peak is really only 2 hours long, and it wouldn't be such a bad thing to have a resource like storage to fill that 2-hour gap. Now, this didn't become part of the 841 compliance plans, at least for MISO or SPP. They stuck with 4 hours. But it's just interesting that you just see the industry evolving to really take advantage of these, really flexible, fast responding resources like storage.
Well, I was going to say absolutely, and the capacity conversation is an interesting one, as you said. But the other one that I'm interested in is ancillary services and qualifying to deliver those, but then also, maybe you could draw on your experience with Customized just to talk about that these resources are very flexible. So, or they can be customizable, I guess, is the best way to say it. So if you want a device that could deliver energy over the peak or whatever in terms of the energy side, or if you want a device that's aimed more at regulation or primary frequency response or something like that, you can engineer the installation to fit that need. And I don't know if you've had some thoughts on that or what you're seeing in the marketplace on that front.
No, most definitely. You nailed it. And really, when it comes to when we start modeling, we Customized start modeling projects for our clients. I mean, really baseline is in any one of the markets is frequency regulation as the service. Now, there might be a different driver. If a client comes to us and says, we are working with a utility where we're going to have a reliability contract with them across their 4-hour peak to deliver a service, that now becomes the primary construct, right? So we build on that. But if especially an IPP type client comes to us and they have a point of interconnection in the market and they're just looking at market exposure, we start with regulation. For one, regulation in many markets tends to pay pretty well compared to the other services. And then there's performance constructs, there's mileage payments now from Order 755. So storage is just very well positioned to earn revenues from a service like regulation. And then you start to get into some of the other services, reserves, spin. And again, markets are they're really trying to get to a point where they have perhaps less active spin on the system, right? Traditional resources that are just out there grinding away at a really bad heat rate. You're having greater penetration of intermittent resources. And so you have these ramp challenges in a lot of the markets. We're still, with as good as forecasting is, sometimes it's not perfect. And so you're seeing ramp products being developed out there. And so that's when we start to kind of stack those other services in there. How would those revenues impact the project viability? What does the offer strategy look like? Managing state of charge becomes critically important for this. And so, we just start to layer in, and we keep watching the economic return. The one thing, when it comes to a modeling perspective, the one thing that makes this really complex, and this is why, excuse the plug, this is why with CES, we started with a storage platform. This is not, we weren't modeling generators and then just tweaked it a little bit to see what we could see with storage. This is a storage platform. And one big piece of this is the technology component. And, we have our standard. Our standard is really a lithium-based battery. Those are kind of the parameters that we'll begin with. We certainly welcome our clients to tell us what technologies to use. But as you start to change these services and your responsiveness goes up and down, your depth of discharge goes up and down, cycles per day may change depending on these services, you then start to identify which class of, speaking at the highest level, battery will be most effective for that project. So there's the whole markets component and the services that we're offering. And then especially now with 841, that we can effectively model everything from the fastest ancillary service to a 4+ hour capacity payment. Now we got to bounce around with the technology platforms as well.
No, I apologize because I diverted the conversation a bit as you were marching west to east in the RTOs, but I just thought it was an interesting sort of follow-up question that I wanted to hit. But that might be a decent segue into PJM because you talked about regulation, and I know there's a long history with respect to PJM and regulation compensation. But I don't know if you wanted to talk about the Eastern RTOs for a moment and how they're doing on Order 841.
Sure. Yeah. No. And I mean, it was a good kind of side item there. Opening all these markets to all these services. 5 years ago, CES really was just modeling regulation. I mean, that was it. That was the service we were looking at. That is certainly not the case anymore. But yeah, great point. I mean, PJM with frequency regulation, the industry is fairly aware of the challenges the early movers into PJM had as PJM started to change the operating signal and the parameters of that fast Reg D regulation signal. And the one thing is, and I will say this publicly as many times as people will listen, I give PJM a tremendous amount of credit for being as creative as they were for that net neutral fast regulation signal. They were really trying to get efficient resources to provide this service as economically as possible with a 10-minute, 15-minute net neutral regulation signal. You could build what was effectively very small, very economic storage to do this. And those parameters didn't quite work out great in the market. And especially early on in the industry, and it's the point I was just making about the technologies. Once you get one of these systems in the ground, as long as you're really keeping it sized and configured to the service that you're offering, if you get outside kind of your bandwidth and your bookends of the operational capabilities of a single asset, you start to run into challenges. And that's what happened as PJM was changing that Reg D signal. So we're still kind of waiting to see what PJM is going to do with their regulation market. We're hearing all sorts of rumblings about maybe going back to a single regulation signal, whatever it may be. But yeah, it was a great learning opportunity there, and I certainly don't criticize PJM for it. It just ended up being pretty hard on, again, the first folks that were in there for Reg D. When it comes to Order 841, this is one area where industry is kind of butting heads, if you will, with PJM, and that's for their capacity requirement. So PJM has a capacity performance market, so it's not really structured in terms of hours, specific hours. PJM and ISO New England has a very similar construct where they're just saying, look, if you're going to clear the capacity market, you bring whatever resource you think is going to be good for that. And when you get called on, you just need to show up. And if you don't, the penalties are very severe. And so that was fine going into Order 841. The storage industry was already looking at that performance construct anyway. But with 841, PJM is now saying you must have 10 hours of uninterrupted capability to qualify for capacity. And so the industry is seeing that as a little bit of a shift away from performance. And now we're kind of taking a step backwards to here's that big block of service that I need. And 10 hours doesn't really accommodate the unique operating characteristics of storage. I'm not saying there aren't platforms out there that can do it. It's just not best utilizing the platform.
Okay. Yeah, no, but PJM's been a wild ride, so to speak. And I don't mean any criticism either. They were kind of the first ones, first movers on this that were really trying to get at the right price signal. And so, no, I'm with you on all of that, but it'll be interesting to see, and this is a podcast focused on storage, but it'll be interesting to see in some of the larger market issues, where things are going with PJM and the capacity market debate playing out there, but also in New York. And without getting off track into a discussion about capacity markets, I do think at some point it's going to get tied together. Some of these discussions. And so it's sort of a word to the wise to keep an eye on developments in New York and PJM, even if you're not so much interested in the generic capacity market debate. I think it's going to have ramifications for the broader markets.
I could not agree with you more. Very well said. And the capacity discussion, and really just reflecting what we talked about earlier in this conversation. What is capacity? What is reliability? Really, what does that look like in terms of how these guys are operating their market? And it's an ongoing conversation. I don't think it'll ever go away in any one of the ISOs. If you want to have a lot of fun, go to an ERCOT meeting, bring up a capacity market, and just run out of the room. Because it's just
yeah, well, they do things. Texas is the Lone Star State. They do things their own way there.
Yep. Yeah. But no, it's a great point about just the markets in general. Fully agree. Yep.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and so that within all of these debates on how the markets are kind of rolling out their 841 implementation, there's some issues I think that cut across all the regions. And maybe one to touch on is transmission. There's a lot, I guess, we can always talk about with transmission, but there's the transmission as storage in terms of the resource categorization debate. There's the transmission cost allocation debate that just never seems to go away. You've seen this debate play out back from the Order 2000 RTO formation days to post-RTO regional planning. And then you had the Order 1000 and post-Order 1000 planning and cost allocation rules. But now you've got, with a much higher penetration of renewable resources, and as I said, the storage's transmission debate on the horizon, or being played out in MISO at least right now. I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you think that cost allocation debate is going.
Yeah, this is a huge, and it's funny, you had mentioned at the beginning that I do guest lecture for the University of Colorado, and I did have a student recently just kind of say at the highest level, what are the biggest issues in the industry right now? And to me, this is one of them. It's per the point you were just making, it's not just a storage thing. And the cost allocation piece is huge, especially in regions that will just say, that are rich in wind, far remote wind. There's still that question of who's supposed to be building this stuff, who pays for it. I think you're starting to see more of an outcry from the incumbent transmission owners no more building this stuff and sending the bill to my ratepayers, right? And it's funny, people make the argument, yeah, but these guys just put it in their rates and they get their return and it's metal in the ground and they should love this. Especially when utilities are saying, we have fewer spinning meters, we need more metal in the ground. I think at the same time, though, and look, I'm an ex-utility guy. It was a great experience. I still drink the Kool-Aid, as I like to put it. Utilities at their core really don't like to allocate costs to their customers. And when you start talking about transmission development for the purpose of building more supply, whatever that looks like, just putting more resources in the ground, whether it's wind, storage, gas, if their ratepayers aren't receiving a very specific bulk of the benefit for whatever that project might be, a lot of these guys are starting to look to somebody else needs to pay for this stuff. And that's really, for me anyway, the crux of the cost allocation piece. And we do. Oh yeah, go ahead, Bill. Sure.
Well, I was just going to say, it's interesting to hear you say all this because, in certain respects, these are the same arguments that people have been bandying about from at least the beginning of my career, in the late 90s, early 2000s. And like I hearken back to people don't really talk much about Order 2000, but that was a real watershed moment, obviously, in the industry when these RTOs were being formed. And I don't know if you remember the whole participant funding debate about, who should really be putting up the money for these projects. And so we used to talk a lot about participant funding at one point. And then, when the RTOs were being formed in the middle of the country, there were some really, robust is the positive way to put it, but brutal might be the negative way to put it. Real robust discussions and battles about this very issue. And a lot of the themes that you're talking about, I think, were present back then. And then we kind of got past it for a while. A poster child for the industry, I think, was the MISO MVP portfolio. And I had some clients who helped develop some of those projects. And so not a positive or a negative spin on it. Just, I think for a while we kind of moved past that debate and realized, okay, there's some transmission build out that needs to happen, whether it be for reasons related to perhaps a period of underinvestment on the part of the industry, perhaps for reasons of, hey, there's a lot of renewable resources that we need to bring to market, and we need to move that power. And now the bulk of that MVP portfolio has been built out. But there's still this need, I think, because you've got a tremendous amount of wind that's still in the queue or having recently come online, or it's going to come online. You've got tremendous continuing interest in storage. In solar, I meant to say, where that needs to be moved in many cases. So it's not going away. And now added to that mix, I guess, is from the storage front is this idea of classifying storage as transmission. And you talked about the ability to rate base assets, iron in the ground, if you've got fewer end use customers, and you another way to build out your rate base. But there's the continuing interest, obviously, and constant monitoring of the various state commissions, and they keep a close eye on all these things. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, both for the vertically integrateds and for the independents.
Yeah, and that was actually really great background there. You put such a good timeline on the thing, going back to Order 2000. And just reflecting on a couple of things you said, my perception of how, at least on the transmission side, the industry has kind of evolved is that I think for a while there was plenty of headroom on the transmission system. And then per your point, we got a lot of wind out there. Transmission is a very complex thing to build. The timelines are very long. It's not easy to get it sited. Very different. I'm not saying it's not economic, but it's not cheap, right? It's not cheap and easy to get out there. And so I think we hit that headroom on the system, and now no one wants to overbuild. No one wants stranded transmission infrastructure just sitting out there unused. And so we're trying to build this very complex asset in these really small increments, and it's not working. It's not, and it's especially not accommodating the industry where, like you said, there's so many resources still in interconnection queues, and we're trying to move this stuff such great distances now. And that just really makes the allocation piece complex. But yeah, just keeping with that same theme. So we had Order 1000 for a while there, and so I was at FERC when we were working on Order 1000A, and I am still waiting in my entire career when I tell someone that for them to reply, "Hey, great job." They kind of go, "Oh, that was you, huh? Great." So.
Yeah, no, and I can imagine that you might get that response.
Yeah.
Order 1000 wasn't super popular, but it is what we have to work within right now. But
it is.
But no,
it is.
But you made a great point. There's a nugget there's a lot of nuggets in what you said. But the point I wanted to seize on was you're not saying it's not economic, but
right.
It's not cheap. And I think by what you mean by that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think what you mean is, look, this is a capital-intensive industry. In general, the utility space, the energy space is capital-intensive, but in particular, transmission, that's a big capital outlay. And so even though it may be economic, which is a critical word, it's not. These are not small investments. They're lumpy investments. And I think the biggest proponents of transmission would, and I'm one of them, would concede as much. It's a lumpy investment, and it's something that's always going to come with challenges associated with it.
Very well said. And so now comes storage. The storage industry is coming in and saying, wait a second, we can do this way cheaper, infinitely faster. I mean, Southern Cal Edison, in response to the Aliso Canyon issue, had storage up and running in 4 months. 4 months is, the permitting for transmission takes longer than 4 months. And storage is also saying, because of our flexibility and the fact that if you really want to, you can pick these things up and move them around if it comes to that, you don't have this risk of stranded assets, and we can improve your timelines, and the financial risk exposure for ratepayers has gone down. And so the development community now wants to contribute this platform to this space. And now we've come all the way back to Order 1000 again. Who owns it? Who has the right of first refusal? Who can use the various tariffs to get their cost recovery for it? We really have rewound to Order 1000 with storage as transmission. It's the same questions coming up again.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. We've got the Nevada Hydro cases dealing with California, and FERC kind of punting on that, saying, look, if it gets through the California regional transmission planning process and they find it to be transmission, well then, by golly, it can be transmission. But FERC not necessarily blessing the specific asset in that case, saying it's transmission. So they kind of punted on that. The MISO, SATOA, storage is transmission only debate ongoing, and it'll play out in the coming years. But you got the various industry players, which you're more familiar with than I am. But you got the independents out there trying to use this asset as maybe more of what we would think of as either a distribution asset or a generation asset. Then maybe you have the vertically integrateds and the odd player like Nevada Hydro sitting out there trying to get this thing classified as transmission. So it's conceivable in a few years that you're going to have storage, quote unquote, being deployed on the bulk power system in all three buckets of what we think of as all three buckets: distribution, transmission, and generation. So that'll be, I think, in a way, unprecedented in our industry. To have to deal with that scenario.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think what's really making it complex is that you don't just have the asset class of storage doing all of those buckets. You have a single storage plant doing all of those buckets. And that's what's making the storage as transmission piece particularly complex, markets like MISO are trying to get the rules in place just for storage as transmission. Meanwhile, you got the industry whispering in their ear, by the way, we also want to participate in the market and earn revenues that way. And that just makes things that much more complex. And so it's just like with Order 841. Order 841 created an asset class for storage, which is exactly what the industry had been asking for. But what Order 841, the industry had already moved on from that, and now we need an asset class for hybrid storage, right? It's, as usual, the policy is trying to keep up with the great people that are getting these projects into the pipeline, just always thinking ahead.
Oh gosh, you hit the nail on the head in terms of the problem or the conundrum that storage creates. We just in our internal discussions here at the firm, we've been trying to wrap our heads around and dealing with the idea of what you just said, that it's not just that storage in general can fit into all these three buckets. It's no, that specific storage installation over there, that little building that looks like a data center, that little building can be all three at once. And that is something that the industry has never had to deal with. And it gets into a lot of problems because as much as people think we've sort of skinned the cat, we can have revenue cutting or this, that, the other thing. But those solutions may not work depending on who the owner of the asset is, and you might really have to get creative on how you divvy up the ownership of these things. So I think that's going to be the good news. Is I think lawyers and consultants are going to be needed to fix those problems.
Well, but it's when I'm just sitting here thinking, this is when we call you, man. Can you figure this out and find us a way to do this? So yeah, exactly. Well,
I think another topic. I know we're probably coming to the end of our time here. We've been talking for a while, but there was one topic I thought that you had raised and is a good one because it's flying under the radar a little bit, but I'm hearing more and more about it, and that's distribution planning. Even a couple of years ago, we didn't hear much about distribution planning, quote unquote, if at all. So perhaps you could give your thoughts on the potential pitfalls or merits and what role the various players should play in this particular sandbox, as well as the potential impact in particular on the storage sector.
Sure. Yeah, great point. And I fully agree with you. This is picking up steam very quickly. And especially out here in the non-market WEC, where I sit, you start to see a lot of the states going to their vertically integrated utilities saying, let's do some distribution planning proceedings. And some folks cheer and some folks smack their forehead. Conceptually, I really like the idea. There is so much being deployed at distribution now, community scale projects, all the way to your really advanced retail customers that want advanced energy platforms at their premise, whether it's behind their meter or in front of their meter, interacting with the utility. And because a lot of these systems and technologies are newer, they are responsive and they are controllable and they can provide a lot of services that are valuable to a retail ratepayer and to a distribution company. And so to sit here and say, hey, we need coordination down at this level to fully leverage these assets. And we need someone that can pull them all together and operate them and optimize them and really quantify a value. The value on distribution is certainly not the same as the value at transmission. And to come up, and I don't know, maybe this is a bad way to put it, but it's kind of how I look at it, to come up with almost these little mini markets, mini ISOs at distribution and plan around these assets, I think is a great idea. It makes a lot of sense. Now, I say conceptually because in practice, this is not easy. And utilities, and I am of the position that the incumbent utility, at least for right now, is the best entity to do this. It's their system, their customers, they have all the data. And I'll even speak, a lot of this came up when I was on the commercial development side. The idea for me that if I had to go to another third party to deploy a project on a distribution system, other than the utility or the customer, I don't want to have someone in there to have to ask permission to do something. So for me, keeping it with the distribution utility at least kept the implementation of something like this streamlined in the near term. But this is a big lift. This is a lot of endpoints to have to communicate with. There's a lot of financial, settling all these things. Go ahead.
And if you're in the organized markets, if you're in the RTOs, then how do you sync this up with the RTO?
Yeah. Right. Very excellent point. And it's funny. I usually say that ISOs, RTOs, at least at the staff level, they don't want to worry about what's happening down on distribution, and certainly not down at retail. But per your point, once you have enough penetration of these things, the impact at distribution is going to be felt upstream. And so your wholesale guys are going to have to be engaged with this. So it's going to be a very big, if nothing else, just the technical systems that need to be put in place to do this is going to be a really big lift. But I'd really like to see jurisdictions, however that's defined, move forward and start to get some of this in place.
It's really fascinating. And if you think about where the industry was when I got into this game, and to the kind of discussions we're having now, it's really unbelievable. But it's responsive to, I think, where society is going, and where the resource mix is going. So it's a fascinating time, I think, to be in the space. But John, I think you and I, and this has happened at some of the industry conferences we've been at, we could riff on this stuff for hours more, but I do think our time is coming to an end for better or for worse. Yeah. But I appreciate very much, we appreciate you being on our program, and look forward to having more discussions in the future. Maybe we'll have you back for a follow-up if you'd be interested.
Oh, absolutely. Always, Bill. And it's always a pleasure bumping into you. Like you said, every time you and I start mixing it up on this subject matter, it seems like we could go on indefinitely. And we're lucky to work in this industry right now where it's just, there's always something to talk about. There's always just really, really aggressive people driving things forward. And so, like you said, the lawyers and consultants are all out there trying to figure out where does it fit. So yeah, I'd always welcome the chance to join you again.
Well, thank you so much. I think this has been a great discussion, and we look forward to talking to you more in the future.
Okay, likewise. Thank you. Take care.
These recorded materials are designed for educational purposes only. This podcast is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual participants. Troutman Sanders does not make any representations or warranties, express or implied, regarding the contents of this podcast. Information on previous case results does not guarantee a similar future result. Users of this podcast may save and use the podcast only for personal and other non-commercial educational purposes. No other use, including without limitation, reproduction, retransmission, or editing of this podcast may be made without the prior written permission of Troutman Sanders.